Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is so great to see you all. It's so great to be here to celebrate these simchas. So great to see some old friends, to see so many new friends that I just haven't met yet. It is a real joy to be here to celebrate Shabbat with my new community for the first time. More than anything, it's great to be here and not in my car anymore after the 2,500-mile road trip that took me from Seattle to here. The drive was great. I just arrived a few days ago. It was everything you'd expect. It was beautiful and relaxing. And and it filled me with a newly deepened sense of patriotism, which, after all, is perfect for this Shabbat leading into Independence Day and this holiday weekend for our nation. If you ever find yourself feeling disheartened about American politics or pessimistic about the State of the Union, I strongly recommend taking a drive like this one. Pessimism has a way of melting away in the face of purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. The route that I took carried me from the piney rainforests of the Pacific Northwest through the rusty red landscape of the Utah desert. I crossed over the rocky spine of the Continental Divide and took shelter from thunderstorms rolling across the impossibly wide skies in New Mexico. I felt like Jack Kerouac with a yarmulke. It was fantastic. It was quiet, and it was reflective, and it was spiritually meditative, and it was educational at times as well. I got to see some natural and historic points of interest along the way. Some of them were ones that I'd forgotten about, and some I never knew existed in the first place. I visited Billy the Kid's grave near Fort Sumner, and the world-famous, or at least regionally famous, Gravity Hill in Prosser, Washington, where the locals claim the force of gravity flows in reverse. I learned not to trust anyone claiming to be selling dinosaur bones at a stoplight at the side of the road, but that you definitely should trust the signs posted by the Forestry Service that say, "Warning, rough terrain and difficult hiking ahead." One of the places that I stopped about halfway through was in Promontory, Utah. You might remember Promontory, Utah from junior high school history as the place where the final spike was driven to connect the Transcontinental Railroad. I'd forgotten most of the details before I got to Utah, but as I relearned the story, I remembered how thrilling the account really is. At the height of westward exploration and the gold rush, the race was on to connect California to the national rail lines for transporting passengers and goods across the country. Building and prospecting were at a fever pitch, fueled by government subsidies and good old-fashioned American capitalism. Ultimately, it became clear that two railroad companies were neck and neck in the competition to finalize a transcontinental line: the Union Pacific from the west and the Central Pacific from the east. The government, taking note of each company's progress, declared that the lines would be joined at Promontory Point and came up with an incentive to speed along the process further: a cash subsidy of $32,000 per mile of track that either company could lay down. Soon the surveyors and graders and track layers were working faster than ever before. Hundreds of laborers were hard at work in the dusty plains and the sun-baked deserts of the American West, laying down the mighty solid wood ties and heavy steel rails through the heat of the day and long into the evening as well. As the two teams edged ever closer to one another, Charles Crocker, the chairman of Central Pacific, was feeling confident. So confident about his men's ability, in fact, that he made a bet with Thomas Durant, his counterpart at Union Pacific. Crocker bet that his men could lay 10 miles of track in a single day, collecting an unheard of $320,000 in government subsidies for a single day's work. Durant took the bet and staked an additional $10,000 of his own money that the Central Pacific team wouldn't succeed and had to pay up when Crocker's men successfully laid over 10 miles of track in a single day, setting a record which still stands to this day. Now, here's the part I didn't learn in junior high school history class. The speed at which the men were working was so breathtaking, the financial stakes so high, and as it turns out, the cartography of northern Utah so imprecise, that neither the Union Pacific nor the Central Pacific construction teams knew exactly where they were or where they were supposed to be going. As it turned out, the arbitrary designation of Promontory Point, Utah, wasn't quite specific enough to be helpful to the graders and surveyors, and unbeknownst to the two teams, in their haste, they blew past one another and failed to connect their lines, overshooting one another by more than 10 miles of track before anyone realized the mistake in late April of 1869. What to do? Well, the secretaries in the executive branch of the federal government were hastily consulted by telegraph, and a solution was arrived at. Both companies would be awarded subsidies for the track they had already laid, but both construction teams would immediately begin work on a semicircular loop that would curve backwards. And the point of connection would be relocated some miles away from Promontory Point to Promontory Summit. Crocker and Durant agreed to the solution, and in about 2 weeks' time, on May 10th, 1869, up to 3,000 people, according to reports, representing the government, the press, and the adoring, thrill-seeking American public, arrived at Promontory Summit to witness the driving of the Golden Spike that connected the railroads once and for all. So, why this story? And why this Shabbat? Why bother to take the time to relearn this story now? On this Shabbat, my first on this bimah as a rabbi of this historic congregation? Well, the first reason is that now, on the eve of the 4th of July, it is fitting and appropriate for us to revisit our American stories. The legacy of the Transcontinental Railroad remains for us as a tribute to values and traditions that are uniquely and proudly American. Innovation and creativity, a drive for entrepreneurship, and the insatiable hunger to explore what is yet unknown. But it's also appropriate because of how the story is not remembered. The end of the story, the penultimate chapter, could have been an embarrassment, an indictment of the shortcomings of capitalism or manifest destiny. The railroad men missed one another completely in their rush for the finish line. But their story is not remembered as one about foolishness or braggadocio or blindness induced by greed. It's not remembered as one about the failure to compromise or prepare ahead of time. Instead, it remains a pivotal chapter in the story of American ingenuity and creativity, one about the priority of progress over perfection. And so I tell it tonight also because there is a breath of the transcendent about this story. It is a railroad story, but it is also a spiritual story. Because our nation, too, the nation of Israel, has spent its time in the desert, stymied by insufficient navigation and a lack of clarity about precisely where to go and what to do when we get there. And ours, too, echoes with a priority of progress over perfection. And our story, too, reminds us of just how important it sometimes is to be willing to stop and loop backward to meet each other. When our people spent our time wandering in the desert, we constructed there a mishkan, a portable tabernacle and temporary dwelling place in which to seek and commune with the presence of God. Our sacred texts describe in detail all the building materials used there: wood and bronze, silver and brass, opulent fabrics, oils, herbs, and the purest gold. Our commentators note that there is something special about the points of connection built into the tabernacle, where a tenon rests in a mortise or a ball rests in a socket, where a delicate hinge connects two mighty beams. They point out that these points of connection are always gilded with precious metal. Wooden posts are interlocked with hinges of silver. Great beams rest in sockets of gold or brass. The progress through the desert is critical, but what is most precious to God, most worthy of gilding and celebrating, are the many points of connection. This is a season of independence for our nation, but it is a time of interdependence and connection for our sacred community and this holy congregation. We are, my friends, I promise you, capable of more than we suspect. We are stronger, braver, more powerful than we imagine. We possess what Tennyson called the equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak perhaps by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. This time is ours, my friends, as a community and a congregation and as a nation. Our work is not yet finished, but we move together forward and we climb upward, ever upward, toward connection. Shabbat Shalom.
I think I speak on behalf of the silence of the room in saying how inspired we feel and how excited we are to be your partner in that sacred work. Welcome.